UK here again, another really quick video here. I'm not going to spend too long on this, I'll keep it to a few minutes hopefully. Sega Mega CD, received this last week. It seemed to be working alright initially, played a few games on it, no problems at all, and there's just one game, I forgot what it's called now, it's a space sort of shooter thing. It was a Namco arcade game that was converted for the Mega CD. I forget the name, but anyway, that's not working. It loads so far and then it stops, and you look at the read LED and it's like flashing away, indicating there's maybe a disk problem. But you know, I've tried, I've reburnt the disk several times. There's nothing wrong with the images I'm using. I suspect it's not the drive, because many of the games just work flawlessly all the way through the disk. You know, you can scan all the audio tracks, no problem at all, no access problems, no speed issues, but just one or two games not working. So I decided to take this to pieces. Looking at the PCB here, this is surface mounted electrolytics, don't you can see them, they look alright. In the sort of vicinity around these, the board doesn't look that clean, but they don't look like they've leaked. But I've taken the first one off on there, just twisted the thing off, and then I'm just about to clean these pads up before I put a new surface mounted electrolytic on there. But straight away, as soon as I heated the pads, I could smell, you get sort of fishy smell associated with electrolyte when it's leaked out. So I think that's what's going on here. I think all these surface mounted electrolytics on here have dried out, and I think that's probably what's causing me the problems. So I've got a good 20 or so of these, should be enough. I think there's only about 10 on this board. So I'm just going to quickly just remove these and solder some new ones on and give it a try. This is the this unit assembled. The problem I was having with this, it wasn't the electrolytics on that board. They did need replacing, but yeah, I'll explain in a minute. But before I do that, I'll just show you a few things. Obviously, to get in this, it's pretty straightforward. You've got 6 Phillips screws, so you just need a screwdriver of the relevant size, and there are 2 screws there as well that need removing, and then it just lifts off. There's a couple of things about this that I just thought I'd mention. You've got a lock, some sort of lock thing here. I've not looked this up. It'd be useful if someone posted what the hell this does, because internally it doesn't connect to anything. It's just a little switch, slides across. It looks like you could perhaps put a cable through it and use that to hold a cable in place, but I don't know, I'm a bit mystified really as to the purpose of that, because it doesn't seem to, you know, there's no sort of, it doesn't seem to be anything to do with the mounting thing there. And incidentally, if you've got one of these, I'll just take this guy out, the Mega Drive. Yeah, they should come with these 2 grounding plates, you know, base plates. You've got one with the little hooks there that mate up to these, you know, on there, and a grounding plane there, I guess. Not really sure what that connects to. It looks like it connects to the inside side of the Mega Drive earthing, you know, the shielding inside the thing, and connects and shorts it to this by these points here, just to make sure that's earthed. And then presumably on the inside of here, you can see that you've got some shielding in there as well. So you've got nice good common ground there. It's a bit, got some silicon on this, it smears a bit, just needs to wipe down though. So I'll just quickly, I'll rip this, take this apart and just show you what I did with the board. The other thing to note here, the front, it's not in the best of condition here. If I look really closely, can you see it's pretty scratched up there, and previously you could actually see straight through, so it's like white. When that black acrylic paint or whatever it is comes off, where, you know, as it was previously, you could see the whites underneath, so it really stood out. And what I've done with this, I don't know if you can see from a distance, certainly from a viewing angle like that, it looks fine. And the way I got around that is just to use a black permanent marker. You can probably see if I get it at the right angle. And you see I've just used a little bit of black permanent marker there. It looks a bit of a mess, obviously, when it's in the really shiny sort of at the right angle of the light reflecting off it. But for normal viewing angles, it covers it up quite nicely, that damage. So until I can perhaps get one of those, I mean, this is a whole, this unit just comes off. It's a little, you know, clips in. There's just little plastic clips holding it in. It'd be nice to get a new one of those at some point, but it's entirely cosmetic, and it does look okay at the, you know, it's a normal viewing angle, as I say. Once you get in there, there's 3 screws holding the CD drive in, one down there, and there's a couple of screws, you know, on the board. One there, I think it's 3 actually, or 4. one there, one here. I think that's it. Before you take this piece of shielding off, once you've undone the screws, you want to pull this ribbon out, and it can be a little bit awkward. Sometimes the easiest way to do it is actually to lift the shielding off first, like that. Just lift it over really carefully, and then you can get easier access here to this ribbon. And you should just be able to just really carefully pull that out. In fact, what I'm going to do is just put a screwdriver under there. Just use that just to help lift that out like that. And then this should just free up through that hole like that. So as you can see here, I ended up replacing these electrolytics. These are surface mounted chips, but they're not surface mounted, and the reason being is I ordered what I thought was probably the right size. I thought these are 4mm in diameter, and I really needed probably 2 to 3mm. So it was, when you actually sat them on the pads, there was 1/4 of a millimetre on each side. There's no way I can make a good solder connection. I didn't really want to order more. I should have done if I wanted to do a professional job of this, but I plan on keeping this. I'm not going to sell it on. So whilst they don't look that clean, they're okay. Good contacts on all of them. And the way you remove these, as I described earlier, you just twist them. You just twist them on the same, to keep it central, so it doesn't, you're not moving it to the sides and things. Just keep it so that the centre is, stays in the centre, and just twist them in sort of clockwise fashion. And after a couple of twists, they just lift off. The pads are usually still soldered on. At that point, I wouldn't try removing the pads that are on there with solder or desoldering them and trying to clean them up with solder, because the electrolyte's still on there. So what I usually do is just use some isopropyl alcohol, brush the board down, give it a really good clean. That cleans away the electrolyte, and then you can sort of desolder the pins that are still stuck on there before you sort of clean the solder points up, ready to put new capacitors on. And that works well. Some people use vinegar. The thing with this is, after I did all this, and it didn't take very long, it only took about 15-20 minutes to replace the 10 caps on there. I put it all back together, powered it up, and I was just getting a black screen, and it was driving me nuts. I thought, oh God, what have I done here? Have I damaged something? Have I damaged a track? Spent a lot of time messing around with it, probably a couple of hours one evening this week, messing with this, really tearing my hair out, thinking I'd destroyed something on the board, or and what it turned out to be, after I'd finished it all, cleaned it all up, and you couldn't see it, but on this ASIC here, it's quite a large chip, and the pin spacing, the pitch, those pins there, was really, really, really fine. I suspect that there was a tiny particle of solder that had, when you use the desolder pump, and sometimes when you're using it, you'll see the bits of shards of solder sort of fall out and stuff sometimes when you pull it away and things. And I think it was probably the smallest blob of solder somewhere on there. I couldn't see anything, but after I cleaned it, I specifically put some isopropyl on here, and there were no loose connections. I'd checked that previously. Put some isopropyl on there, brush it off, clean the whole board. Did the same thing on the underneath, because underneath somewhere where these electrolytics were here on the underneath the board, you could see it just looked a bit discoloured, like there's something had leaked, maybe electrolyte had leaked through the board, or I don't know, something had got on there. And I cleaned that off, reassembled it all, and then it worked fine. No black screens, it just worked every time from there on in. And in order to get this board out, the best way to do this is to unscrew these 2 screws. There's 2 screws holding that carpet slot in there first. If you don't undo those, it's very difficult, because you've got see that little plastic notch there, and there's one over here, and of course those hold, this cartridge slot is holding the board down, so you need to undo those pretty much all the way out in order for the whole thing to lift up a little bit sufficient so that this can clear these plastic notches. And that's pretty straightforward. And obviously there's another ribbon here, and again this just pulls out just like that one did. The other reason I've come back inside here now is to replace the battery. I've measured that, it's something like 2 volts or something, and whilst it's holding the backup information, clearly 2 volts is not right. It should be, I think is it marked 3 volts? Yeah, it's got a 3 volt marking on it there. So I'm just going to replace it with a standard battery that I use for a lot of these things, which is something I just picked up off eBay. It's a lithium-ion rechargeable, 3 volts. I think there's something like 40 milliamp hour. You probably find the one that's on there is probably 50 or something similar, very much like what was in the Neo Geo. Those usually had a 50 milliamp per hour, but a 40 is fine. It just means that generally, if you switch the device off, it won't hold the power quite as long, sort of 20% as long, perhaps. So instead of holding it for 2 months, it might hold it for 1.5 months or something like that, you know. It's not a big deal, and these lithium-ion rechargeables don't tend to leak, as that one hasn't leaked. I'm not sure it's a lithium-ion rechargeable. I don't know this. Can't tell whether it's nickel metal hydride or what, but anyway, so I'll replace that now. The other thing while I'm here as well, I'll just explain the whole issue. You know, the reason why I did this is because Starblade would not work, and I must have spent pretty much every evening and most last weekend messing around trying to understand what might be wrong with this system. Now, most of the games I tried worked fine, no problems at all, no glitches, no slowdowns, loading, just worked flawlessly. And that, to start with, you know, that made me think, oh, it works fine, you know, there's nothing I need to do to this. But when it came to run Starblade, one of the ways, it's a US version of the game, by the way, that I burnt, and one of the ways I was approaching getting US games to work, because this has got a PAL, you know, European BIOS on there, and if you try and boot, what happens is you know, you get this standard start, you know, the splash logo up, and it says click start to start or whatever. You hit start, and then it goes into the CD player mode, and it doesn't show as a CD-ROM, it just shows as a CD audio disc, and that's what you usually see when you're using the wrong region game for the BIOS you have. And I found it quite early on, very early on, as soon as I started finding some of these images and there were US versions, I thought, how can we get around this? And I found a really simple approach, and that was to use the EverDrive. Put on the EverDrive the USA and Japanese BIOS, and in fact I put some region-free BIOSes on there as well. And you just load them through the EverDrive. So, you know, you start the EverDrive, switch the Megadrive on, and navigate through the file system there using the EverDrive file manager, whatever it is. Find the ROM, hit start, you know, or whatever it is, like I think press A twice or something to load it, and it then loads that, you know, that particular BIOS, which was great because I could load, you know, USA BIOS, Japanese BIOS, region-free BIOS, whatever, and then you stick the game in, and then it recognises the disc, and I'm like, oh great, I don't need to do a region mod for this, I don't need to get another, you know, an EEPROM, stick it on there with a switch, etc. I can just, you know, this approach of using the EverDrive works great, and it did. It worked fine for, you know, I must have burnt a good 20 or 30 games. Most of them were American, and they all worked up until Starblade. And with Starblade, as I described earlier on, what was happening with that is you put the game in, it comes up, Namco, yeah, splash screen, fine. Hit start, yeah, you hear the little voice sample there, I forget what the guy says or whatever, and then it's like, and then it gives you an introduction animation with some voiceovers and stuff, that's all great. Start again, you're ready to start the game, and then suddenly you got your green light on here, and your red light's like flickering away, flicker, 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 and then it would get into this pattern where it just went flicker, 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 you know, it would just be every half a second, it would just be flashing on and off, 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 and you could leave it. I left it thinking, okay, there's a read problem here, is the disc, you know, is it the laser, you know, there's something wrong with the drive, etc. And I'd leave it for 5-10 minutes, and sometimes the pattern would change a bit, and it would be struggling forever, and I'm like, okay, well, there's clearly something wrong with the drive. And I burnt the disc I got different sources, tried different types of media, different burning speeds, you name it, I tried it, and it affected the read. It did affect the read. I have to admit that the pattern of the read access there would change slightly, but it was always the same problem where when you start the game, it just never ever loaded. You just always had this flickering, you know, different flickering patterns on the read access there, and you could hear the drive, you know, seeking, moving a bit, seeking, reading, seeking. So I was convinced there was something wrong with this drive, and I spent a lot of time then. I took this drive out. I don't know whether you can see. Yeah, you can actually. There's 4 pots there, which I haven't been able to find schematics for this drive, so I'm not sure what they do. You're gonna have probably one that affects something like rotation speed or the angle of rotation. You can have like a laser focus, laser intensity, things like that. Basically, all to do with the, you know, controlling the you know, the mechanics, if you like, behind the drive. So, you know, I did a bit of reading up on this, and I found threads, you know, with lots of people with read problems on these drives and things. And you know, the obvious one is people spot these pots and go, oh, can I adjust these pots? And you know, people asking those very questions on the forums and things, and people saying, oh no, if you do that, your drive's going to be knackered. You know, don't touch them. You can't do it. It's impossible. Well, that's complete bollocks. Putting it bluntly, you can. You just got to know what you're doing. If you take this drive out, and in fact I'll do that now and I'll show you. Right, so I've got the drive out, I'll just turn this over. You can see the pots there. What you do is, obviously, the correct way of doing this is getting all the schematics, you know, service manual, understanding a bit about how the mechanisms and things work on here, and understanding a bit in general about how CDs work, and the various components that control the various motors and things on here, regards to timing and stuff. And yeah, using an oscilloscope, you'd be able to look for particular signals that you use to control the various motors and the optical part of it and all the rest of it. And you ideally you would know exactly what you're doing and be able to tweak each the relevant pots here. These are just variable resistors. Tweak one of these to adjust the signals accordingly. Using a scope, and that's the professional proper way of doing it, the way they would do it in a proper support technician would have done this back in the day. I haven't got all the information, so I dare say it's going to be very difficult to understand how to adjust that, even if I dug my scope out of the loft or whatever. But one thing you can do, like to say, when people say you can't do this, don't touch them, you'll break it beyond repair, it'll never work again. That's complete crap. What you can do is get your meter, put it on resistance, measure, always stick with the same points. I always use the left two, so on each of these I've measured the left two on every one. Measure the resistance and make a note of each one, the position of each one of these, not the position rather, the resistance for each one of these pots, and make sure you do write it down. Don't just try and remember it, because you're bound to forget once you start dealing with lots of different adjustments and measurements and things in different places. But like typically, I think that first one, for example, was 5.04k or something, and it's I don't know what size it is. Is it 10k resistor? Can't really say. 10. Yeah, I think it's two 10Ks and two 5Ks or something like that. But anyway, it measured, I wrote down the resistance and tweaked it a bit. And when I say a bit, you don't want to be, turning these all the way to their extremes. That's just ridiculous. What you're looking for, if it's going to be, let's say, mechanical breakdown, and what I mean by that is, it's the wearing of these things, the wearing of the bearings, the motors, the slide, the bar there that the thing slides up and down, and just mechanical degradation over years of use, etc. You typically the variance is what's going to happen is going to be out of tolerance. It might be if your laser's good, that is, we're talking about here, just the mechanical side of things. The tolerance as well slipped, so it might be 6% or 4% outside of its tolerance limit. So what you're looking at moving each of these one by one basis. I wouldn't just go in and start tweaking them all. Just pick one resistor, measure the resistance of, across 2 pins on there, write it down, and adjust it one way, so maybe clockwise, by a few percent, 5%, 7%, not very much at all. So for example, I think when I first tried one of these, it was measuring 5k, and I tweaked it so that it was 5.45k or 5.35k. And reassemble it all, test it, any difference. And to be honest, everything worked. Every one of these, I tried both directions, clockwise and anti-clockwise, moving them by sort of 400 ohms, 500 ohms, half a k each way, which was a reasonably large tolerance value. Each one probably, it might be 5%. I've changed each one of these by 7% in either direction, and some of them I went back and tried even more. I went sort of, instead of 5k, I went right up to 6k, and I did the same thing with the laser. You can't really see it in here, but there's without moving taking the board off. I'll see if I can get a better angle. Can I see it? Yeah, I can. You can actually. You can see it there. That blue pot down there. That's the one that I believe controls the voltage to the laser. So I did the same thing with that. Measured that. It was 5.01k to start with, so I tweaked it to 5.35 or 5.4. Tried it again, no difference. Games were loading still, everything still worked, but that Starblade would not work. It didn't affect loading times or anything. There were no read problems. Just disassembled it. Same thing. Went back to that resistor, measured it, reduced it from 5.4 to something like 4.6 or 4.7k. Retried it, no difference again. Everything still worked, apart from Starblade. So I spent a lot of time doing that, experimenting with the different pots on there. Everything now is back exactly within an ohm of exactly what it was, including the laser pot. So it's as it was when I got it, and that's the important thing. That as long as you've made a note of these and you're measuring them, and you're doing it accurately. You can't go wrong. You really can't go wrong experimenting with these. But the key is not just wildly, I'm going to put a screwdriver on and piss around with it. Because if you do that, you will destroy it. Because you will, especially because there's 4 of them. It's not so bad when you got one. If there was just one pot on there and you were messing around with it, you could mess around with it to your heart's content, make the problem a lot worse, continue to mess around with it until you potentially get it back within a similar level of what it was, and it might start working again. But the key is measuring the resistance of these, and doing it consistently, because there are 3 pins on here, and that's important to know. You've got like a centre pin, and then there's the extremes of the resistance. So what I mean by that is, say for instance this is a 10k resistor. It probably isn't, it's probably 7 or 5 or something, but let's say it's a 10k resistor. Your first pin, if you measure, if it was set all the way to one side, to twist it all the way to its maximum, and you measure 2 of the pins, 2 of them are going to measure 0 and the other one's going to measure 10k. Now if you turn the resistor so it's 50% the way turned, and you measured again across 2 pins, you're going to get 5k, and across the other 2 pins you're going to get 5k. So you can see what's happening there. It's like a little slider, if you like. It's a slider between the 2 extremes. So sometimes it might even be worth, if you've got the time, write down the resistances on both ways, because it's only going to be using and that's the inaccuracy, I guess, in the way I did this. I consistently measured the left 2 pins every time, so from the common pin to left pin, common pin to left pin, common pin to left pin, assuming that it's always, you're going to get, if it's 4k on one side, you're going to get 6 on the other. Sometimes it doesn't quite work out like that. You might be a few ohms out because of the nature, the quality of these components and things, and the way that the materials they're made from, effectively. Sometimes you don't always get that. It's not 100% accurate. There's a tolerance thing there again. So yeah, a more accurate way to do it is to measure both sides, from the left to the middle and the right to the middle, and write them both down. But always measure it the same way around. Make sure you're looking at the board the right way up. You don't want to be looking at it that way and going, oh, okay, last time I did it this way, and getting the wrong measurements on there. But if you're accurate with that and you're careful with what you're doing, same with the laser, you can't really go wrong. One thing I would say about the laser, and it may well be the case with 1 or 2 of these, if you went to the extremes of these, you could overpower something. I seriously doubt it, but certainly with the laser, for prolonged periods of time, if you increase the change the resistance on that, instead of having however many millivolts go to the laser, you might suddenly have times that by 7 or 10 or something. You could find that it reads discs still, and if you left it there for a prolonged period of time, it could burn the laser out really quickly. So this is why I say do things in small tweaks. If you're going to experiment, adjusting the laser voltage, and that's probably where you would start. If you get problems with one of these where it is not reading discs and you do think it is the laser, all the symptoms are, yes, it's the laser, that's where you start with that resistor. Don't even go near the other ones. They're probably going to be fine. It's probably going to be that one 9 times out of 10. And start with really small steps. If it measures whatever it measures, in my case 5k, just reduce it so it's 4, 7, 5k, so it's like you've reduced it by 25 ohms or something, and just really, really small tweaks, and just try it small tweaks one way, then try it small tweaks the other way, and then widen that amount. So instead of doing 25 ohms each way, now try 50 to the clockwise. Is that work? No, it hasn't. Now do it 50 ohms greater than what it should be originally, and try that until you get it working. And even when you get it working, then just experiment within that area. Reduce it a tiny bit by a few ohms. Does it still work? Is it better? Is it worse, etc. Until you get that sweet spot. That's the way of doing that, and it takes a long time because you've got to keep disassembling it, reassembling it, and that is one of the absolute ball aches I've had with this. Is that many of these things you can work with the lid off and you can see what's going on, you can measure things, but not with this, because unless you've got the lid on here, you can try and sit your Mega Drive on here like this, but it sinks down and you're not making good connections here, and you start getting, it's not working, you're getting a black screen, and it's because it's not flat. It's not flat, you're not making a good connection. So yeah, it's not an easy system to work on by any means at all, and I suspect that in the Sega, sort of factories and things, places where this, the proper support technicians worked on these, they would have had something to replace this with, this bridge, a ribbon. You can just literally probably take this off, connect something to the board, and have a ribbon coming off to a Mega Drive, and then all of this here can be exposed for you to work on this while you're doing it. And you could fashion one of those yourself, pretty much. As far as I can see, there are some passive behind this shield in here. There's some sort of passive type ICs, very small ones. I think they're just like buffer type chips, probably. But you could probably fashion something. If you get one of these edge connectors, you can make one yourself and join it to another edge connector, and it would probably just work. They're probably just straight pin throughs. I've not, like pin 1 to pin 1, pin 2 to pin 2, etc. all the way along. But I've not checked that. Other thing while I'm here as well, this is the audio board. Obviously you've got power. Your power comes in and it feeds the power up through here, and then that's obviously distributed to the CD and stuff. This is typically just got like I don't know, op amps and things like that, I guess, probably for the audio, because you've got, you know, obviously your audio input jacks and things there, and output jacks, so it does some, you've got audio mixing. If you've got anything wrong with the mixing on your Mega Drive, it's going to be, you know, components and things around here. The capacitors on here are all good, because typically they don't tend to fail, especially low voltage ones on a circuit like that. You know, they can fail, but it's very unlikely. There's something there on a heat sink under there, I don't know, probably a transistor or something for the, might even be a voltage regulator, I don't know. But yeah, typically, it looks like there's nothing much I really need to do there at all. Right, so I'm going to replace that battery now, and then get it all reassembled, and I'll talk more about why Starblade didn't work. Just about to solder this. That's at your ground point, and you've got 2 plus points there. So the battery I've got is slightly different. Might have to make a bit of a modification. Not sure if it's going to be wide enough. Well, it might just fit across there. Looks like yeah, it's going to be wide enough, I think. So just make sure you get your ground at the top. Something else I just spotted. You can see here. This is leaked electrolyte from the other side of the board, and it's some that ran there. I'm going to clean that up. That could have been causing some problems as well. The rest of the board looks all right there. You can see there's a bit of flux there. I've not done that. That's when that chip was soldered on at the factory. You know, they must have done that as like the last step, I guess. You know, regionalising each of the boards or something. You know, someone just got the job of manually sticking a chip on there, and there's still flux. I'm just going to leave that for the moment, to be honest. No problems there. A bit of flux, a bit of electrolyte there as well. Leaked on. So I'll just clean the underside of this and get the battery on. Right, so I've cleaned that connector up, or the underneath of that connector, I should say. Cleaned the underneath of that connector up, so all my electrolytes been cleaned off there. Battery contacts are good on there. Obviously there's only 2, that third point's not used. You've got your ground, as I say, and your plus. That looks okay. Hopefully that'll fit within the packet, you know, the shielding that goes on the top. Yeah, I'm going to reassemble that now, and I'll explain more about the Starblade issue. There you go, you can see that's Pitfall working alright. Pretty poor graphics really, but it was pretty good for the time. It's the colour palette that was the main problem, I think, on these. Right, so to explain what was wrong with Starblade then, and why I spent so long messing around with this thing, I'll show you the way. What I'll do is I'll switch this back off and on. I'll just jump to the, I'll just hit start, and I'll eject a disc. If anybody knows a way of doing this, I don't know any other quicker way, but it's to come into here and then just choose that. I wish it had an eject button on the damn thing, but there isn't one. And I'll just stick in Starblade. I'll reset it. So the way I was doing this previously, as I say, because these are region protected and this was a USA disc, I had a folder on my SD card called region, and in there I had a few different region-free BIOSes, and you know, several of them. And for example, if I load the US region, region-free BIOS, you'll see, select and start, I get a different. There you go, it's loaded that BIOS. So that stands to reason that if I loaded this and it was a US BIOS, the US disc would work, and that was working for most of the games, but not for Starblade. I'll just see if it does it on this. Let's see what happens. See if I can recreate it. Because what I've done is I've changed the disc to be European BIOS on the disc itself, using one of those region changes on the ISO. Okay, that's just because I've just reset the RAM with that new battery. So yeah, that's formatted that. So I got this far previously. And this was using the technique I've just described with a USA disc on a European, and this all worked. That all worked. And then you get the intro. This bit works as well. Now at this point here, now instead of loading the game, you just get it flashing away on the drive. Now it's accessing the disc now. I've got the feeling this will probably work. Now I've changed it to European, but we might see the same thing. Be interesting if we do. And I think we do. If I just go down, you can see that there? That would easily lead you to believe that there's a read problem, or a problem with the disk, a problem with the drive, and it'll sit there doing that for forever, effectively. Sometimes the pattern of read can change, and if you listen really closely you can hear it seeking away. But I know that is, that now that there's nothing wrong with it at all. There's nothing wrong with the disc, nothing wrong with the console, and I can prove that by, if I just take this off and take this out. Now you can skip. You don't necessarily need to take the Megadrive out. You can just say run CD and it will boot it without loading anything. But if I switch that on with no BIOS, just to show you, on the UK BIOS, no hacks or anything involved here. Just click start and watch what happens this time. And there's only two games that I found glitches like this. One of them was Snatcher. You can start the game, everything fine, intro's fine, the music's fine. Start the game, it plays, you can control everything. But there's no text. You don't see any text at all on the menus. And it's because it's obviously a text-based type. Select, look around, inspect things. You can't do anything with that game, and that's got the same problem. Start. And I bet this now starts. So we've got the intro, and it doesn't take very many seconds once you've hit the intro for the game to start. What a surprise, the game now works. Bearing in mind that this is a USA disc, all I've done is use that the tool that's available online to update it so that it works. It says it identifies itself as a European region. But the fact remains, it's very unusual, this kind of behaviour. In fact, like now, like I say, now it's working. Yeah, if I was to boot a USA BIOS, it wouldn't. Could be some protection, I guess, built into the software to check the BIOS, and that could be what's happening. It's you're loading the BIOS into RAM. It's not the BIOS that's physically on the board, and when the game starts, the game actually does some sort of request to read the actual BIOS, and then you've got a mismatch between whatever BIOS you booted from and the BIOS that's actually physically on there. Anyway, I just thought you'd find that interesting. Obviously I covered a few things there. I covered replacing the caps, changing the battery, and a little bit about the pots and things on the CD. And if this was struggling with, let's read discs and things now, at least, let's say, I'd be able to adjust that relatively easily. But anyway, glad I've sorted it. Hope you find this interesting, and I'll speak to you soon.